A Lantern, Chapter 30. You will remember that Basil Mackenzie, an aristocratic young Scotchman of Aberdeen, riding to the Hares and Hounds, wooed and won Maggie O'Connor from the winds and silver hazels of Ballyporeen. But what you do not know is that several generations later, the good saints up in high heaven's court gave that couple 3 chances, each to mold the life of a descendant, a baby girl just born upon earth. Basil Mackenzie first crowned her with hair like the mist around the mountains of Glencoe when the sun shines through. And immediately, Maggie O'Connor gave her eyes the colour of the blue-black waters of Kilkee. Then the man, remembering sensibly that the outward appearance is not all, endowed her with a keen Scotch mind. But the woman smiled and slipped an Irish heart into her. For a long time Basil pondered cannily, wondering how he might use his last chance, and finally gave her the sturdiest of Scotch chins. But Maggie O'Connor laughed and pressed a roguish V-shaped cleft into the center of it. Practical folks there are who will not believe this, but here, 19 years later, was Catherine Deal, with her misty Glencoe hair, her blue-black Kilkenny eyes, and her gay great-granny's dimple in the middle of her dour great-grandfather's chin. Sure, and what more proof could a body be needin'? Here she was, Catherine, the only daughter of Mackenzie Deal, this warm summer afternoon, stretched out in her grandmother Deal's hammock on the screened-in sitting-room porch of the farmhouse. Her slim, lithe body, in its blue and white sports suit, curved comfortably in the hammock's old meshes, one slim silken foot rhythmically tapping the floor. As free and as irresponsible as any colt in a pasture, old Abbi Deal thought as she looked out at her granddaughter. And just about as untamed, too. Across the lane road under the Lombardies, Abby could see the latest model of sport roadster, blue and white, a special order of Max. Whether Catherine's dress had been ordered to match the car or the car to match the dress, Abby did not know. Old Abbi Deal and her granddaughter did not have a great many interests in common. They did not seem able to get along comfortably for any length of time. Catherine had not the slightest atom of her young cousin Laura's interest in either her grandmother's opinions or reminiscences. With her usual blunt frankness, she had more than once announced before a group of the relatives, including the object of her remark, Granny Deal. Incidentally, she was the only one of the 7 grandchildren who called her Granny. Granny Deal and I don't hit it off too well. She said it with the air of one who modestly announces an accomplishment. But for some reason she had driven in alone from Omaha several times recently. The dashing new roadster had bitten off the gravelled miles between Omaha and Cedartown frequently this summer of Abbi Deal's 79th year. Rather strangely, for her unusual active self, the girl seemed to like to sit quietly under the cedars, or swing idly in the hammock on the screened porch. This afternoon she had a book into which she occasionally dived, and, as often, dropped back in her lap. Abby pulled her chintz-covered rocker up closer to the screen door. "What are you reading, Kathy?" she called. "Michael Arlen. Nothing but. He's delicious. Everything he says sounds silky. Listen to this, Granny. Love is like a hammer. Oh, not a hammer. A hammer, darling. It beats and beats inside him. And presently it doesn't beat so regularly, and presently it doesn't beat at all. Doesn't that just melt in your mouth?" The words are very clever, but not all clever words are true. You said a bookful, Granny, and inversely most things that are true are not clever. She seemed to have everything, thought old Abbi Deal, studying her attractive granddaughter. She had the Irish wit of the O'Connors, the Scotch canniness of the Mackenzies, the German self-interests of the Lutzes, the Yankee determination of the Deals. She carried everything before her. People did whatever she wished. She breezed in and out of every setting with self-assurance. She dominated every situation with poise. She told her parents what she thought of them and handed out indiscriminate advice to any of her relatives. And through it all, she looked as lovely as a picture. And now, Abby, thinking of what the girl just read to her, returned thoughtfully. You can't describe love, Kathy, and you can't define it. Only it goes with you all your life. I think that love is more like a light that you carry. At first, childhood happiness keeps it lighted, and after that, romance. Then motherhood lights it, and then duty, and maybe after that, sorrow. You wouldn't think that sorrow could be a light, would you, dearie? But it can. And then after that, service lights it. Yes, I think that is what love is to a woman, a lantern in her hand. Prosaic, Granny. Prosaic and uninteresting, albeit the romance chapter has possibilities. I choose to think of Mike's variety that it beats and beats is more thrilling. You'll see, Kathy, when it comes. Heavens, the little grandmother speaks in the future tense, and to me, Catherine Elaine Deal, what has had several distinct and separate love affairs. Oh, Kathy, how can you speak so? I doubt if one of those affairs, as you call them, was love. Oh, but they were, cher ami, or cher ami. Whichever you are, they were deep, thrilling, luscious love affairs while they lasted. She went off into a little rippling laugh. Abbi Deal did not argue. She did not answer. She only sat and looked out at her granddaughter, flippant, sophisticated, wise, irresponsible, lovely. Because she had a deep-rooted clannish love for all her own people, Abbi Deal loved the girl. But she did not understand her. They lived in two worlds. No, Granny Deal and Catherine did not hit it off any too well. It was only a week later that Sara Lutz came out to spend a few days with Abby. Her 77 years sat lightly upon Sara. Her white hair, dressed rather elaborately, held a gaily colored green jeweled comb in its coils, and she had little emerald earrings in her small colorless ears. The natural pink in her cheeks of the early days had been replaced by natural pink from a box. And her small merry eyes behind their shell-rimmed glasses were still bright and twinkling. Her dress was of modern cut, and her dainty high-heeled slippers, by the side of Abby's broad, altogether serviceable kids, looked, as they'd walked through the yard, like little gay yachts towing broad barges into harbor. The two had just reached the sitting room when they both jumped at the sharp sound of an auto horn and looked out to see Catherine in her brilliant roadster turning into the lane road under the Lombardies. "Honk, honk! The lark at the Heaven's Gate sings," she called out breezily and slipped out of the car to run up to the house, her lithe young body aglow with health and energy. "No," she said in mock agitation at the sight of both grandmothers. "Not two old noble ancestors." Catherine's reverence for old age was on a precise equality with her general timidity. She gave them each a hasty peck and took immediate possession of the conversation. "I haven't seen very much of you lately, Sara, but Abby here, I have been cultivating her acquaintance this summer with Malice, and the queer part, Sara, is that the little old dear doesn't have the slightest idea why I've been dropping in so solicitously." Sara laughed good-naturedly, and Abby asked, "Then it wasn't just because you wanted to see me, Kathy?" "Oh, no," she admitted blithely. "It's all on account of Jimmy." "Jimmy?" "Jimmy Buchanan." "Oh," Abby remembered, "the young man in John's law office." "The very same," quoth the maiden, as a tear stood in her eye. "I've had a crush on him ever since I first saw him striding along with his little old textbooks across the campus. But I never dated him then. I suppose you can guess why." "No," Abbi Deal and Sara Lutz gave up immediately, for the answers of Catherine's conundrums were usually as unique as they were varied. "Because," Catherine said mysteriously, "he was a barb." "No," said Abby, "not that bad." Abby might not be conversant with half of Catherine's modern vernacular, but she did know that a barb was a non-fraternity man. "Now, Granny, you're turning on the sarcasm. Don't you make merry with me. Yes, my loves, a barb never went into a frat." It was as though she spoke of Lucifer's fall or Napoleon's exile. He probably washed his own shirts on Saturdays and ate at hamburger joints, and here I am crazy about him, but he won't have me. I've done everything but fling myself on the cement walk in front of Uncle John's office and yell until he comes out and picks me up. Mother is getting a little discouraged about marrying me to the Prince of Wales, but she's still counting on someone from the Van der Asters. And here I am just foolish about Jimmy Buchanan and ready to throw myself at his resold Oxfords. He'll be governor someday or secretary of the exterior, but in the meantime he'll marry some little neat Jane that'll economize and have twins. Kathy! It was both grandmothers simultaneously. Oh, very well, one at a time if you prefer, she went on unblushingly. He's a nice boy, Abbi Deal broke in to avert other verbal catastrophes. John speaks so highly of him. I'll invite him out some night to supper when you're here. Oh, you needn't bother. I already have. It's tonight. She smiled at them cheerfully. I'm going to get him at 6. You'll fix a nice dinner, won't you, Granny? Abbi Deal sat down weakly. Flesh of her flesh was saying that. Blood of her blood was taking the initiative in a love affair. Oh, Kathy, girls are so queer nowadays. They do such forward things. It would have been nicer for me too. Girls nowadays, said Miss Deal, do things immediately, right off the bat. Snap, just like that. So I see, said Abby dryly. Now here's the idea, Kathy went on, unperturbed. You two old baby dolls get up a nice little dinner while I'll go after Jimmy. Then I'll come home with him and put on a fetching pink apron and set the table and bring in the provender. And Jimmy will begin to think that I'm the neat little Jane. She smiled at them with gay nonchalance. She patted them both, she kissed them each a time or two, and they gave in. She's yours, Sarah, as much as she's mine, Abby said, when they were starting the meal, and I for one am ashamed of her. Oh, she's all right, Abby. She's just outspoken. At 19, Sarah, I was married and had Catherine's father, and had washed and ironed and sewed and made soap and woven rag carpet and... Yes, but Abby, you just couldn't do anything else. I can think of a dozen things that Kathy could do right now if she set her mind to it. They prepared dinner, 2 old belles of another generation. A little after 6, Catherine dashed into the lane road at a speed which jangled the nerves of a flock of stolid Plymouth Rock hens, and set the brakes a few inches from the gander that stuck out his neck and expressed disapproval of the blue and white monstrosity. Honk, honk yourself, Catherine called out to the offended dignitary, and then came into the house with a nice-looking, clean-cut young fellow. She came triumphantly. Well, here's Jimmy. It took handcuffs and an anesthetic to get him, but I did the deed. Jimmy, you know Grandmother Deal, but I want to present you to Grandmother Lutz. Grandmother, Jimmy Buchanan, the conquered. Well, she waved an airy hand to the 2 old ladies. How do you like 'em, Jimmy? I could love either. Where t'other dear charmer away. Abbi Deal was embarrassed beyond measure. She was used to the girl's wild talk before her own people, but she did not dream Kathy would keep it up when the young man came. Abby looked at him. He was not disgusted. He was looking at Catherine with approbation and liking, even admiration. He liked her flippant talk. The young man himself liked it. Well, she gave up. She washed her hands of the present generation. They were way beyond her. Catherine put on a rose-pink apron which she had brought with evident forethought, and winked openly at her respective progenitors as she carried in the food. They ate the palatable if simple dinner together, this rather incongruous little group, after which Catherine said demurely, Now Jimmy and I'll wash the dishes, won't we, Jimmy? This was something of an astonishing innovation in itself, as heretofore dishwashing had not been one of Catherine's favorite indoor sports. A half-hour later, Abby and Sarah went into the kitchen just as Catherine was hanging up her dishpan. Everything all right, Granny? She wanted to know. Why, I think so, Catherine. It looks very nice. Neat little Jane, am I not? She grinned brazenly at Abbi Deal, who immediately reddened for her. "Well, Sarah," said Abby when they were alone, "my mother blushed and gave my father a rose by a well on the Scottish moors. I cried on Will's shoulder in an old honey locust lane. Matt courted Emma after church and singing school. And Kathy goes out and gets her man." Sara Lutz laughed. "After all, Abby, there's something honest about it and frank and above board." Abby put the butter crock back into the big white refrigerator. "Sarah," she said, "it may be honest, and it may be frank, and it may be above board, but it's not subtle, and it's not romantic, and it's not artistic." Sara Lutz's bright black eyes twinkled behind her shell-rimmed glasses. "If you're not all wet, old lady," she said solemnly, "you've said a mouthful."